Let's look at some properties that you can use. So one property that you can have in a style is, let's add a background color here, background so one that you can use is opacity. So let me give you an example. So opacity says how opaque something is. So let's say we want the opacity to be, so this is a number between 0 and 1 where the default is 1. So if we just do a 0.5, you can see that this my header became lighter. If we do a 0.1, then you can sort of barely see it. And if we go back to the 1, then you see it's full. So that can be handy if you're trying to composite things on top of each other where you still, let's say, want to see what's in the back possibly. Another thing you could do for backgrounds, for instance, the background doesn't have to just be a color. It can be an RGB value. So you can actually specify the color. So the red, the green, and the blue values from 1 to 256. So let's say we want to do full red. So that can be 255, 0, 0. So from 0 to 255. The other thing we can do is we can actually provide a URL for a image. So there we go. Okay, that's more correct. So we got, just took me a while to find the actual URL. So this could be either a URL to a remote server, or you could also just put into your project here pictures if you wanted JPEGs. And so if we look at this, we can see, if we look at, for instance, list items and make those have a lower opacity, you can see here we can actually see the tomato back through the text here. Let's try a background color of yellow. And that maybe makes it clearer that beneath the yellow we can actually see the image. Whereas if we had the default opacity of 1, then it would just block it completely out. So that's one use of the opacity. There are some various things you can do with the backgrounds as far as if the image is too small, whether it tiles it, how big it scales it, all those sorts of things. We're not gonna look at that right now. Let's look at fonts right now. So this is our default font. If we provide a font here, we do that well. Let's just look with the font size. Okay. So we can specify a size that is either absolute or relative. So we can use absolute values, like for instance, we could use points, which are 72nd of an inch. So we can make the default font size be 30 point, let's say. And now we can see all of them got bigger because clearly the default font size was smaller. And we notice also that what we've got here is some inheritance. So the body has a font size of 30 point, and then the header is some amount relatively larger than its parent's font size, that is the body's font size. Similarly, the list items are some amount with respect to the unordered list, and the unordered list are some amount with respect to the list items. We can use points, which are 72nds of an inch. We can use pixels, which are 90ths of an inch. We can go ahead and use millimeters or centimeters or inches. So we could use 0.25 inches, or let's say 1 centimeter. Let's just make it 2 centimeters, right, which is bigger. Or we can do, let's say, 10 millimeters, something like that. Okay, those are all possibilities. And those are absolute values. We can also use relative values. So let's look, for instance, at the header. So let's get rid of this size. And let's make the header have a size which is with respect to m's, em. Okay, so we're going to make it 2 m's. An m is the width of the M character in a particular font. So what we're saying is this is 2 M's with respect to the parent. So that means basically it's going to be twice as big as the parent's font size, which looks like kind of about the default. If we make it 4 times, sorry, we need to make that an H1, and we'll make that 2 times. And you can see form as well. So if we go to 2M, it looks like that's about the default, right? Because if we comment this out, it seems about the same size. Okay. We could make our list items have a font size that is, we can also do relative size of like smaller or bigger, and that is again is with respect to the parent. So if we make the font size, let's ignore the LI and just do the header. If we make it bigger, sorry, it's not bigger, it's larger, then we can see. As well as font sizes, you can also do text alignment. So I could do something like text align right. And now all of a sudden these things are going to be right aligned, or center. We can set the font family. So we can do, for instance, a sans serif font. Serifs are these little lines at the bottom and the top of characters. So sans serif. And we can see now these values become sans serif. And of course we can make the body be sans serif to make them all be. And we can also use particular fonts. So Times New Roman, for example. Your font family, you can actually choose a succession of fonts, and it will use the first one that it finds. So we might choose Times New Roman if that's possible, and if Times New Roman isn't possible, we'll just choose a serif font. Okay. So we could have, you know, my nifty font. And if that's not possible, we'll get a serif font. And guess what? We don't have my nifty font. What other fonts? So there are built-in fonts basically, and then there are, you can actually install particular fonts. Google has, for instance, quite a set of fonts that you can refer to. By that, what I mean is Google has them available for download, so you can then reference them in your CSS. So it doesn't have anything to do with Chrome. You can do decoration. So for instance, you can do underlining. You can do, although this isn't really common, overlining. You can do so we don't want a color here, so I don't know why we are choosing the color. Line through, to cross out. So this can be useful if you're trying to, for instance, style links. You can actually change your text somewhat. So you can do some transformation of your text. So text transformation, you can do things like uppercase or capitalize. Okay. So it's nice basically that you might have a style guide that prefers everything to be in uppercase or everything to be capitalized, and you don't have to change the HTML itself for that. That's kind of the quick run through of text.